Welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys, a former D1 hooper and high school coach, current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
Man, it's early, guys. I made the rookie mistake. I was on mute right there. I went through my whole intro, Omari, and I was like, man, why isn't Omari chiming in here? It's his turn to do his thing. And obviously, I was muted. So we're going to get into this, but first, we do have a review over on Apple. Again, we always appreciate these guys. So this is from LA Pistons fans. He said, Bryce and Omari, 5-star. This is the most reasoned and informative source of Pistons news and opinion out there. I really appreciate you guys. Your calm demeanor and sincere interest in what you're doing are especially appreciated. So another really cool review there, Omari, on the podcast, which we always appreciate.
Yeah, you guys always leave us the nicest comments and reviews. Feel free to continue giving us your feedback, good or bad, but hopefully good, because it's always great to hear from you all and know what we're doing great.
So Omari and I think Omari actually got less sleep than me. So I was kind of like pouting this morning because I only got a few hours of sleep, and there we go. I only got a few hours of sleep, and then Omari comes, he's like, yeah, I was up till 3-4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, dang, I don't even have that excuse. So this will be fun. I know we'll kind of get some energy and the juices flowing here this morning to talk about the Pistons draft last night. So let's get right into it, Omari. Ausar Thompson, it seemed like this is where things were going leading up to the draft, and that's where it ended up with Troy Weaver and the Pistons. So what were your initial thoughts on that? I know you guys got a chance, it looked like, to talk to Ausar last night. Let's get us started here.
Yeah, it seemed like the intel on Cam Whitmore really shifted a lot. Just in the last week. I don't know if anybody predicted him falling all the way down to 20, but you talk about the big swing and just all the skills the Pistons coveted at that 5 spot. And Ausar Thompson does check a lot of those boxes. Troy just talked about how he felt as though he connected with Ausar during the pre-draft process. And then we talked to him last night, and, he's talking about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey and Jalen Williams as sort of an example of what the Pistons could be next season with himself and Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. And it seemed like a really, smart kid, somebody who really knows the game of basketball. And of course, there's a lot of talk about his fit with the Pistons and what he's going to bring. And you look at the athleticism and the defense and the playmaking, and he does check a lot of those boxes the Pistons need at the wing position. I did ask Troy about the shooting, and he expressed confidence that he could shoot. Ausar Thompson did as well. And we put it all together. I mean, it really does make sense why the Pistons went that direction. And that should be a fun team next season, too. Just, you look at Ausar and Duren and Ivy. A lot of teams don't have that amount of just bounciness and playmaking from those 3 spots. So I think it does check a lot of boxes for them.
I've said, not on the podcast, but on other things I've done, I feel like I kind of started to misevaluate Ausar because as, someone that kind of covers the Pistons, I got really kind of narrow-minded in, okay, him versus Cam Whitmore. Like, those were the 2 true wings, in my opinion. Amin and Anthony Black were jumbo initiators. Jarris Walker and Taylor Hendricks were more like power forward type players. And so I was kind of trying to pigeonhole Ausar into the same type of wing as Cam Whitmore. And we'll talk about Cam. I do want to get into that eventually, but not right now. Let's keep the focus on Ausar. And so I pigeonholed him into that. And then as I came around on this Andre Iguodala type of wing, I started to see it a little bit more, Omari. I think either Troy or somebody, I think, even mentioned that, kind of made that comparison as well. Like, I think he has obviously some upside to do more than that, but just this defensive stalwart, elite defensive guy. If he gets there, obviously it's projectable. And then offensively, maybe he's not a great shooter, but he has a great feel. You can use him in a variety of ways. I think if you're creative, he can be really good. So I've kind of talked myself and worked myself into being more excited about this pick, with the understanding that it's not easy just to project somebody to be Andre Iguodala, right, Omari? Like, just because you're athletic and have a good feel for the game doesn't mean that's what you're going to end up being.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very specific comparison from Troy Weaver to compare him to the Philadelphia version of Andre Iguodala. And we've seen a lot of athletic playmaking wings coming to the NBA. I mean, he could have said Evan Turner. He could have said a lot of guys who kind of fall short of the career that Andre Iguodala put together. But if Ausar does fit that blueprint, and, I'm sure we'll talk about OTE, and that's talked a lot about just the adjustment of competition there. But if you're getting an Andre Iguodala type of wing on this team, and, I think back to, like 9 years ago, 2014, when they were rumored to sign Iguodala in free agency, and they went with Josh Biff, which, we'll have to go down that path. But Iggy's skill set, I think, has always been on paper just something that the Pistons have needed, not just this team, but in general. You look at the last 10, 15 years, they've just lacked wings with that type of playmaking, that type of shot making and athleticism. And you just look at this team, and they do clearly need that, right? I mean, look at a lot of the players that they could even go after in free agency who check those same boxes. So, it's clear where the front office's head is right now, and they have a very clear idea of where this roster is going. And, of course, also a lot of talk about just having multiple ball handlers on the floor. If you're adding an Andre Iguodala-esque player, I think in any capacity, then that not only raises your floor, but your ceiling as well.
Yeah, that's what's intriguing with me with Ausar. Whenever we were talking about a man possibly falling to the Pistons at 5, it was like, okay, he's got to be able to do some of the things we're going to assume we see from Ausar, but then also a man can be almost your second primary initiator, almost your backup point guard. I think there's some potential for that with Ausar as well. You're probably not putting the ball in his hands in place of Cade or even Jaden the way you may a little bit with the men. But for Ausar, he may eventually eliminate the need for a backup point guard. And this isn't me like trying to run Killian Hayes out of town. We'll talk about Marcus Sasser here probably in the next segment. But I think Ausar has the potential to be, okay, let's stagger some minutes here and he can initiate offense. Or what if Cade does start really knocking down shots and Jaden gets really comfortable off the ball? You put the ball in Ausar's hands, you let him initiate offense a little bit. I think the big thing, and again, we'll talk about this draft as a whole, is I think the defensive end of the floor was really emphasized. Now, I think Ausar has some things he's going to have to figure out. Both of them did based on where they played. I think they have some bad habits they developed in the OTE. But there's no question that the defensive upside is really there with Ausar Thompson, and he can take all those defensive matchups that we don't want Cade and Jaden to necessarily have to take.
6'7", 7-foot wingspan, and he can really move, right? Like you talk about the athleticism, but in general, he's just somebody who moves incredibly well. And if you're talking about just pure tools to be that type of defender, I think it's really hard to do better than Ausar Thompson at that spot, right? I mean, you could go Jarris Walker, you could go Anthony Black. There are some other guys who are really good defensively in that category, but they really don't have that combination of wingspan and athleticism that Ausar Thompson has, and he feels a very big need, right? I mean, last season we all talked about just how much they lacked that kind of big wing who could maybe give you an option to deter the Jason Tatums and some of the other guys. You're not going to stop those guys, obviously, but you just need tools in the tool chest to be able to do it. So you have that. And then to your point about his playmaking, I am curious to see if he can do a lot of the primary ball handler stuff. I mean, the entire, I guess, I won't say knock with Ausar, but when you compare him to his brother, it's that Amen is more of the on-ball primary guy, and Ausar is more of the secondary, keep the ball moving. But, they had similar assist numbers last season. The ball may not have been in Ausar's hands as much, but, he was still a primary playmaker in a lot of ways. And I also kind of look at the Boston Celtics, where you have all these different guards and Derek White, Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart, not anymore, but in general. And, they get within the game the finals this past year and in the finals a year ago. And none of those players are really necessarily like, quote unquote, pure point guards, but it's just about having multiple ball handlers and, multiple options to attack. And I think the Pistons can do a lot of that now.
I think people are really concerned with the shooting and obviously the floor spacing and all of that. And I get it. I really do. But there was other holes that needed to be filled on this team. You're talking about the defense, and Ausar projects to fill that and just continue to get more athletic. I kind of had a tweet the other day about how I think it was after Cade's rookie season, people were like, this team needs to get more athletic. It's the most unathletic team in the NBA. And Troy Weaver goes out in 3 picks, he takes Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, and Ausar Thompson. Like, all of a sudden, this team is not unathletic anymore, even though, yeah, shooting could still be something. I told somebody on Twitter I would use Hami as the baseline for Ausar Omari. Take Hamidou Diallo, make him a couple inches taller, wingspan, and then give him more athleticism, Omari, and a much better feel for the game and passing, defensive feel, all of that stuff. Like that's kind of the baseline, in my opinion, of what we're working with here. So yes, at number 5, if you just get that, that's probably not what you're looking for, but that's the baseline. He's also younger, obviously. You know, he is 20. Ausar is 20 already. Their birthday was, he's 20 and a half. Their birthday is in January. But that's kind of what you're looking at here. And I do think that's kind of the role that we're going to see from Ausar initially. What do you think? Is that what, would you agree with kind of that comp, that role, that archetype of player for Ausar?
I agree for the most part. I think he will just do a little bit of everything, right? I think when you look at the needs for this team, I can see them telling Ausar next season, what you bring to this team is going to be predicated on defense, right? Like, that's the area of the floor where you've got to bring it the most. You have Cade, you have Ivy. You may not need Ausar to be as heavily involved in playmaking where he needs to, right? But if he could really make defense his charge and embrace making life easier for those guys on that end of the floor, I think he could have a pretty clear path to playing time pretty immediately. But beyond that, I like the Hami comparison, but he's more like, you take what Hami gives you, but then also it's like if Hami were a primary playmaker, right? Somebody who could really pass and keep the ball moving. And, there's just some stuff in Ausar's package that, just overall, you can compare him to any player in the NBA, but it's just not many guys who are just that gifted athletically. So you can do a lot of things with him, and I'm curious to see which direction Monty Williams goes with him as a rookie. Because roster-wise, it seems like Ausar is also like Detroit's first lottery pick. And, who knows how long, who probably won't be asked to do too much. Like, Cade had to do everything as a rookie. Cade goes down, so Ivy has to do a lot last season. And then Duren ended up starting half the games he appeared in. And, all these guys probably had to carry much bigger loads than you would expect from them. Or maybe necessarily want from them as rookies. But you look at this team and just overall depth that they have, and they don't need to ask Ausar to do a lot. You can just have him come in, be a defensive specialist. He keeps the ball moving. You can probably live with the shooting, maybe being longer down the road. Maybe he's ready day one, but, maybe that's still a work in progress. You can live with that, and you can put him in a position where he can just let the game come to him. You don't have to ask him to be that do-it-all type of player like the other lottery picks have had to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I tweeted out like, hey, I would go ahead and start Ausar from day one. And I got some pushback, and I understand it, right? Playing in the OT, that's going to be a big jump in competition level. He is raw. Like, as we're talking about a lot of these positives, there is a lot of rawness to him, even on the defensive end of the floor. But I think what you have to realize with Hami is it's not Cade coming in being the face of the franchise running the show, right? It's not Jaden coming in being asked to be the number 2. If Ausar started Omari, he would be the 4th option on offense, maybe the 5th, depending on how much you think Jalen Duren is going to play into all of this. So offensively, I don't think his expectations or what they're going to ask him to do is that high. They're going to ask him to do what he can do well, which is move the ball, cut, offensive rebound, get out in transition. Those aren't hard things for Ausar to be successful at as a rookie. What I worry a little bit is, from day one, do you say Ausar go guard Jason Tatum, Ausar go guard LeBron James, Ausar go guard, Jimmy Butler? That's where I get a little bit nervous, Omari, because you can hurt his confidence if all of a sudden he's supposed to be this defensive stalwart and then you put him up against those guys and he doesn't have success. So I'm actually a little more nervous with them giving him too much defensively, but I think he's a great kid. Like you said, all the intel was he was a great kid. And it sounds like from the interview last night, you felt the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they have $30 billion in the cap space that they could use to get another defensive player in and take some of the pressure off of Ausar. But yeah, you could utilize him in a lot of different ways. You don't have to ask him to, I think especially not having to carry too much of the scoring load, like having 2 other ball handlers to play off of from day one. And then you also have, Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, and all these other players who can make things happen. And, he's in a pretty good position, really, especially for his skill set where, he just won't have to carry the load he had to carry at OTE. And he did a pretty good job of that. I mean, his numbers, his efficiency overall was still pretty solid, even though the shooting obviously didn't really come around until the playoffs. But he should be able to just come in with the Pistons and just embrace whatever role they need him to, which will probably bode pretty well for him long term.
All right, guys, we are going to do our normal 3 segments. They might be a little bit shorter, so we're going to take a short break here. When we come back, we'll talk about Marcus Sasser and the draft haul as a whole. And then at the end, after our second break, we'll take some of your questions. So we have a couple of them starred here. If you have some questions for Omari and I, we'll do a little Q&A, a little mailbag stuff. We'll get to those after the second break. But we got to take a short one right here. When we come back, we'll dive into what ended up being another first-round pick, Marcus Sasser.
All right, we're back for segment 2, and we're going to lead off and talk about Marcus Sasser, who, of course, the Pistons traded up with Boston for. They packaged the 31st pick and the 2 future seconds to get to 25. And, Marcus Sasser, of course, had a really good career at Houston. 4-year player, but does a lot of stuff well. I mean, he shot the ball really well. Really strong defender. I mean, he's 6'1", but he's got a big wingspan and, should be able to defend 1s and 2s in the NBA. Toughness. This was, to me, I was told last night that Troy Weaver and Monty Williams were both really high on Sasser. So this was sort of you could call it like a joint pick, maybe, like, coach got his guy, front office got their guy, and just a really strong culture fit as well. But Bryce, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Marcus Sasser, because just going into the draft, Pistons didn't necessarily have a big need for a point guard, but obviously look at what Sasser brings, and he really does, I think, fit what the Pistons want just from an identity standpoint really well.
We talked about this with the Tyler, I think, whenever we did our first round 31 for the Pistons. I think we talked back and forth. Is this something they really need to go better off just taking one of these wings, and a lot of those guys were still available there. And I know a lot of Pistons fans were upset with that. I had people texting me about like Leonard Miller and different guys like that were still on the board. I saw a lot of people really upset about the move up Omari. That struck me a little weird. Like, I don't know, like if they identified Marcus Sasser as somebody they feel like can come in and help this team. And like you say, I think he's a good culture fit. I think you play at Houston, especially for 4 years, and you're going to have a certain mentality when you come out of that program. And so I think it's fine. I don't know what the 2 second-round picks are, but I mean, if they need a second-round pick in the future, they're going to be able to get one because those things fly around all over the place. So I wasn't overly upset about that. I think I gave this draft a B on your timeline whenever you put that poll out. I think that was leading. That was the majority at the time. That was last night. So, I mean, because there is some, there's a chance that Ausar doesn't pan out. Like, there's a real chance there. And while Sasser maybe not the biggest need, I like him. And I don't know, I'm interested to see I don't think it means the end of Killian Hayes. I don't think it means the end of Alec Burks. I think you can have 5 guards and be able to play all of them at least this season. But I really like Marcus Sasser as a player, and you wanted 3-point shooting. This kid can shoot it. If you just look at his career, Omari, 37% on 7 attempts. So a high volume 3-point guy, over 80% from the free throw line. His assists increased throughout his career. He doesn't turn the ball over pretty much at all. And he gets after it defensively, even though there, isn't a ton of versatility because of his size.
Yeah, and I was surprised to see people kind of knock the Pistons saying that they took 2 guards when they already had 3. Because Ausar is you could call him a guard, but he's more of a wing to me.
Yeah,
and he's going to play off ball a lot. The thing about Sasser is that he could also play off ball a lot. Because of how good of a shooter that he is. And I think if we look at their draft more as far as which players occupy which roles rather than maybe just pure positions, it makes a lot more sense. But I do like Sasser's game a lot. He could really, really shoot it. Like, I think he was around 38% last season, and he shot it pretty well all 4 years. He's got some range to him. And he's a really fiery defender, too. He just strikes me as a player that once people, watch him play, he'll become a fan favorite in Detroit, just because of the energy he plays with and just his ability he's just a good overall playmaker. I think to get a more experienced guy late in the first round is a good move for them. Like maybe Ausar is more of a swing. So now it's just, let's take a player that we feel pretty good is going to play 10, 15 years in the NBA. And that's Sasser. And I think when you look back on drafts, you typically see that a lot of those 4-year guys, they may not have the same quote unquote upside as some other prospects, but they could come in and play immediately. And they end up having pretty good careers. So I think Sasser, who I think really kind of occupies that combo guard role, you could put him next to Cade or Ivy and feel pretty good about it. He's a good defender in his own right. And it just, I just think the pick makes sense. I also think people tend to overvalue second-round picks. And I think Trey and his front office, they've been a lot more maybe loose with their willingness to include second-round picks in deals to make deals happen. But to me, that's not a big deal. I mean, if you give up a future first, that's different. But 2 future seconds, teams swap seconds around a lot. I think it speaks to how much they wanted Sasser. But I think from a value standpoint, I don't think it's a big deal if they gave 2 seconds up.
Yeah, I think one thing we've learned with Troy Weaver, he identifies the guys he wants and then he goes and gets them regardless of value. If you wanted to tell me this was bad value going from 31 to 25 for a 6'1", 6'2" combo guard, that's fine. I still think Marcus Sasser is a good player. I think he's going to come in and help day one. I think he's going to have a, 7 to 10 year NBA career as a backup guard. And I think he's in a good situation because he's not necessarily a primary initiator, Omari. So he fits perfect playing next to Cade Cunningham because Cade can be the primary initiator, but Sasser can guard the primary perimeter offensive player on the other end. So putting him next to a jumbo initiator like that, even Killian Hayes in the second unit makes a lot of sense. I think you could see a world where those two really get after people defensively. And just some more shooting numbers, Omari. From 3, in his sophomore season, he took 8 attempts, 34%, but he shot 85% from the free throw line that year. His next year, he took 8.6 attempts and shot 44% from 3. This last year, that dipped a little bit to 38, but he shot, again, 85% from the free throw line. So a lot of shooting metrics that really play into him being a good shooter. And just the mentality overall, what he's going to do defensively. I really like it. I was excited about that pick. And like you said, second round picks are what they are. I think you can go replace those and replenish them if you really need it. Well, I'm interested to see what you thought because I liked a lot of those wings in this area of the draft where they got Sasser or even at 31. But you start to look at that wing room, that 3-4 room. They have Ausar now. They have Bogey still. If you believe in Isaiah Livers at all, Hami's still on the roster. And then, of course, we all think Isaiah Stewart's going to play that 4 position. If you add a free agent also, Omari, where would that guy have played? I don't know that there's necessarily minutes there for him anyway. I'm not saying you always have to, make a selection for that, but that room all of a sudden gets a little bit crowded, maybe a little bit too young, if you want to keep Bogey around. So that may have played into this as well, that just – you can only have so many guys you can develop because there's only so many minutes available.
Yeah, I think it's that. And also coming off of a 17-win season, you probably just approach the draft with the mindset of, let's get players that we just feel good about in general. You could always make trades down the road to bounce the room out a little bit. And I think you look at the draft board where the Pistons took Sasser, and there were a lot of pretty good wings still on the board. I think Ben Shepherd went right after him, and you saw Maxwell Lewis and Julian Phillips and just, a lot of players that, maybe on paper kind of fit that 3-and-D archetype a little bit better. But, yeah, you look at free agency, of course, we talked about it for a while. They probably go with some sort of 3-and-D wing in some capacity that direction. So do you need a star and then a wing at 25 and then another wing in free agency? Probably not. And, we still have to see what happens as far as free agency. But, I just think Sasser's a really good player. I think a lot of the issues people have with the pick would disappear once they see him play because he does give this backcourt. The backcourt needs shooting and it needs defense, right? I think this was a very defense-minded draft for the Pistons. between Ausar and Sasser, you got two really, really good defensive prospects who can raise the floor next season.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest takeaway, Omari, is, this was not a good defensive team last year. And as excited as I am about Dan Burke coming in to be the defensive coordinator of the defense, you got to have players that defend to go along with it. You got to have athletes. You got to have guys that will get after it and want to do those things on the defensive end. And you got two guys who seem to project to do that. And both of them, what I love is they make Cade and Jaden's jobs easier. They make their lives easier. If you don't have to put those guys on a primary wing offensive player, you don't have to put those guys on a primary perimeter, like on-ball creator now, because you have Ausar, or what we think Ausar is going to be, because you have Marcus Sasser, even Killian Hayes. If we can't forget about him, he's still on the roster for now. So those guys can really expend a lot of their energy doing what they want to do offensively, and just take kind of those second and tertiary offensive players. And I think that allows them to really do and expend energy on the offensive end. I do want to bring up, I don't know how much you've looked into this at all. I think the one undrafted free agent, at least I've seen for the Pistons, is Tosin Ubama. I don't know if I said that correctly, but the forward out of Princeton. I did a little bit of research on him. I didn't do anything for him pre-draft, but I heard a Scotty Barnes light whenever I was watching a video this morning before this. So he's a pass first guy. I think he has the record for most assists in the season at Princeton. Maybe not a big time scorer, but kind of this forward that can pass the ball, be a good connector. So that's the one undrafted free agent I've seen so far. Have you got any more names outside of that?
No, I don't have anything else beyond that. Maybe some more clarity will come in today. But I think you just look at the Pistons' overall draft class last night, and the takeaway is, let's make Cade and Jaden's lives easier, right? I think they kind of looked at what they thrived with as freshmen. As rookies, kind of what they struggled with. And the Pistons said, we need to take some of the load off of them defensively, and we just need to get some more creation and shot making next to them. And both of those draft picks, if you look at it through the angle of how can we make Cade and Jaden's lives easier, I think both of those picks check those boxes pretty strongly.
All right, real quick before we go to break, we got to go back and circle back to Cam Whitmore, Omari, because we've been saying for a few weeks now that this was a Cam Whitmore friendly podcast, and the NBA draft was not friendly to Cam Whitmore last night. I had him number 5 on my overall big board. I had him number 1 on my Pistons big board. I want to just remind people real quick, Sam Vecini, who's maybe the best in the business in terms of NBA draft media stuff, had Cam Whitmore number 3 overall. And this kid falls all the way to 20, Omari. Like, this was crazy to me. It was one thing that he got passed up by the Pistons. It was another thing that maybe he fell out of that tier of those top kind of 9 guys. But to fall completely out of the lottery through the middle of the first round, what were you thinking just as you saw that free fall?
Yeah, I think even the morning of the draft, a lot of people figured he was a top 10 lock, even still. From the fall all the way to 20, I think was shocking for everybody. And you hear a lot of, noise about his medicals and this and that. And there's reports that he just didn't interview well. I know I heard earlier this week that he was on Detroit's draft board, but not necessarily at the top of it. Like he had fans, but, clearly at some point during the process, they decided that Ausar was the safer option. It's tough to say exactly, what it was that kind of cooled teams on Cam Whitmore to the extent that it did. Just to fall the 20, I don't think anybody would have predicted that, before the draft. But, whatever the medical situation with him is, clearly scared a lot of teams away. And then it sounds like it was just that, and maybe a combination of just, underwhelming workouts and interviews. And it's tough to say the extent that whatever his medical issue is, injury maybe affected those workouts. But very surprising fall. I'm still a big fan of Cam Whitmore's game. I still, stand by everything I've said about him, of course, these last few weeks. Player of that type of athleticism, shooting, has a really high ceiling in the NBA. And, you just look at him as like an off-ball player. And, the playmaking doesn't, it's a red flag. It doesn't completely scare me off of him as a prospect, because we've seen a lot of wings in the NBA not be like the greatest playmakers, but still have long careers just because of what they can do without the ball. And Cam Whitmore still has all of that, but clearly there's some red flags in his medicals that really kind of knocked his draft stock toward the end. And, Houston might have stumbled into, two of the best 5 prospects in the draft. It's funny because it seemed like this whole time it was where Houston go, oh man, or will they go Cam Whitmore? And then they end up getting both. So, obviously a big win for them to get him at 20, but very surprising for sure, not just to see the extent that he fell.
That's what makes this whole thing so hard, Omari, is, again, not to go back to Vicini, but Vicini's connected too. And obviously he hadn't heard this much intel if he had him as high as even Giovoni and these guys were mocking him in the top 10 still. So that's what's crazy to me is the guys that are most connected had heard some of the intel about the medicals and all that, still were keeping him in the top 10. And so it's almost like it had to be even worse than what they had heard or what people were saying, even behind the scenes, not just what was getting out to us. I actually had caught wind of the medicals maybe a week or so ago, but it must be even worse than what any of us, I feel bad for him. At the same time, I'm kind of interested to know, I guess maybe I'm just being nosy here, but I'm curious, are the medical, is it more than just broken bones or something? Is it a heart thing? Is it a respiratory thing? Is there something, like that where it's almost unsafe for him to play? That's what I'm interested to find out. And then I don't know, because I'm with you. I stand by my evaluation of him as a player on the floor and how he looked. And so, Houston could run out a lineup next year, Omari, of Amin, Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun. That's pretty exciting for them. But I'm excited with what Detroit can run out as well. We're going to go to a short break here. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and get those in now, and then we'll answer those as they come in here to finish off the episode. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back with those.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and we are going to start off with this question from Kirk Legcuro. I believe it's a pronunciation there. If I got that wrong, I'm sorry. Is Tucson? I'm sorry. I'm going to struggle with his last name.
Avuma.
Oh, Boomer. It's like a 2-way deal or just a training camp.
I think it was an E10, right? And it was an E10 is what I saw. So
yeah. I believe it's a E10. I have to follow up on that today. That's the downside of recording at 8 a.m. But I believe it's just a E10, and then down the road later this summer we will see that becomes a 2-way or just a cruise invite or what comes of that.
Yeah, I think those 2-way spots are going to be interesting for the Pistons, how they play out. Assuming we'll get more information on that over the next couple of days. And then, guys, we'll record again Sunday afternoon. I believe we're going 2 Eastern or something like that. So be on the lookout for that. We'll do more questions and all, have some more insight into all of this. Obviously, we're just, 12 hours from the draft last night. So we'll keep with the questions. Travis Rosinski, you've been very active in the chat. Appreciate you, Travis. I think you were even here early. Hypothetical, Detroit gets Cam in free agency. What's the lineup? So Cam Johnson, let's say the Pistons sign him. I would assume then you probably do see a starting lineup of Cam Johnson and Bojan Bogdanovic in that scenario. I don't know what you think, Omari. I assume we would all pencil in Cade, Jaden, and Jalen Duren, 1, 2, and 5. And so it's kind of those wing forward spots. So, I could see a world where Ausar doesn't start in that scenario. I could also see a world where maybe you just bring Bogey off the bench and let him provide spacing in the second unit.
If you bring in Cameron Johnson, then, he probably starts, and then you have a couple wings to choose from, for that other 3/4 spot, whether it's Ausar or, Bogey or somebody else. So I'd be curious to see which direction they go. It could be matchup based as well. If you want a little bit more defensive pop, you go for Ausar. If you want the shooting, you go Bojan. But I think sort of the nice thing about that is just you have different wing options, and the Pistons haven't had that in the recent seasons. I know the Ausar's the 5th pick, and people want to see him start, but I think it's a luxury, to be able to sign somebody free agency that makes you not have to rely on your rookie as much. So, if they sign Cam, then, I'd be curious to see where they go with that other spot. Maybe they stick with allowing their high lottery pick to start from day one. But, Bogey, he is a great shooter and he fits all lineups. And they have some versatility there as far as which direction they go.
How exciting is Summer League going to be, Omari? I mean, that first night, I'm assuming we're going to get Houston, Detroit, Amin versus Ausar. And then, of course, we're going to get, I can't imagine they're not going to go Wemby versus Scoot. That's going to be a lot of fun. I know we're both going to be out there, still waiting on our credentials, but that's going to be exciting to watch those two guys go at it. I have a feeling that place is going to be packed. Thomas and Mack is going to be packed there on Friday night. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, same. I remember 2 years ago, just all the hyped up when it's like Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green matchup, and the gym was packed for that one. And now you get to repeat a different version of that 2 years later. I kind of crack up at like this rivalry between like the Pistons and the Rockets fans on Twitter that kind of started with Green and Cade and somehow has persisted this entire time. I mean, I've probably watched these two teams play, 3 or 4 times in that stretch and couldn't tell you the final scores for either of them. I mean, they're typically 2 matchups like the NBA's worst teams, but the fan bases keep finding kindle to keep this, to keep this rivalry going. Yeah, now the 2 brothers are on each team, so that'll be fun. That'll be a fun summer league matchup, and it just seems like the NBA keeps finding ways to make Pistons and Rockets fans argue with each other.
Well, and Amin and Ausar played into it even more last night because Ausar said he had Cade as the number 1 pick in that class, and then Amin said that he had Jalen Green, and so, or say, I don't know, maybe Ausar said Amin had Jalen Green. So they're just going to keep playing into it. It's going to keep growing. It'll be fun. Let's go to Matt Way here. Always a big time supporter. Appreciate you, Matt. If something comes of DeAndre Hunter talks that Jake Fisher reported, can he and Ausar play together as the 3-4? I don't know if you saw that in Omari. I think it came out by Jake Fisher that the Pistons were in talks about DeAndre Hunter. I don't know if that was just a draft night thing that didn't come to fruition or if it's continuing on. But have you heard any of that? And then thoughts on DeAndre Hunter?
I think Ausar and DeAndre Hunter could absolutely work as a 3-4. Both of those guys can defend. We know for a fact that Hunter is an above-average defender in the NBA. Could also shoot. Ausar is probably the stronger playmaker of the 2, and he can also defend. So, it gives you a really strong 3-4 combination defensively with shooting and playmaking covered as well. Absolutely. And I think the thing with Ausar is that, as long as the guy next to him can shoot, he can probably play with anybody because of what he brings athletically and defensively and as a playmaker. I mean, it could be Cam, it could be DeAndre, it could be Jeremy, whoever. I think Asar's playmaking enables him to play next to a lot of different wings.
Now with Ausar, I really, at that position, you want another guy that defends because I think that gives you a really good defensive, wing forward. I think you got to have a guy that can knock down some shots, but the passing from that person doesn't have to be great, right? Because you have Cade, you have Jaden, you have Ausar, you have Jalen Duren. You have plenty of passing already. You almost just need a play finisher in some type, ideally one that can stretch the floor. From Camille, appreciate you, always support. Which player would be our target with the MLE? And so I tried to look this up. It looks like, if this is correct, that the MLEs are roughly $12.4 million for non-taxpayers. So you're looking at somebody in 12 point. I don't know that none of these guys that we're talking about, like Cam Johnson, I don't think you're not getting him. I don't think you're not getting him for that. I don't think you're getting Grant Williams for that. Is that like the Dylan Brooks play? If they wanted to go with Dylan Brooks, could you get Dylan Brooks for that amount? But, maybe he gets that from a better team that's going to win some more games next year. So Max Strus is going for more than that. Maybe Yuta, but that seems a little bit much for Yuta Watanabe. So there's a few names for me that I guess could play into that if you're not giving them, this longer term contract like you would if it was Cam Johnson or somebody like that.
I do think the pendulum has kind of swung too far in the opposite direction with Dylan Brooks. I mean, obviously he said a lot of stuff that came back to bite him during these last playoffs, but covering him down in Memphis, like he really does work extremely hard on defense, and he would lift Detroit's floor there. And obviously maybe the shot selection you kind of have to have a conversation with him about. But overall, I mean, I do think that's probably more of a Dylan Brooks range of outcome if you're just talking about the MLE. There are some other players in that range who can come in and really bring, some good shooting and playmaking. And, I don't have the free agency list in front of me, but just I'm talking about like a guy like Yuta, I think can make sense in that spot. Maybe like a Torrey Craig, I think would make sense in that spot. He can defend and knock down open threes as well. So you have a few role players in that range who I think could really come in and fill a role immediately for the Pistons.
12.4 million for the non-taxpayer MLE. So that's where I'm at. I could be reading that wrong. This is where I go to for that type of information. I don't know if that has updated with the new salary cap that came out. I know the salary cap came in a few million higher than even what people anticipated. So another one here from Travis: who is the main free agent target? If not, are they going to take bad contracts for future assets? Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few, like you spin big on Cam Johnson. That sounds like the main hot name. Maybe you can, offer him a big enough contract that Brooklyn doesn't match. And then the next option to me is maybe you overpay for 1 year, a couple years on a Kelly Oubre or a Grant Williams, somebody like that. Grant Williams is a restricted free agent as well. And then if not, then I do think that's when you go to the Tobias Harris thing with the Sixers, right? Omari, you trade for Tobias Harris, take on quote unquote a bad contract, but a guy that can still contribute to the team and would fit with the team, especially with the Ausar pick, and hopefully get some future assets. So I think I would go through those things kind of in that order if I was Troy Weaver in the front office.
Yeah, the thing with going after Cam Johnson is that it ties up your money, sort of like in that restricted free agency limbo until the situation resolves itself. So if you're going after Cam Johnson, he's probably the main target. And of course, not only is he just a good on paper fit, but there's a relationship with Monty Williams there as well. So I will look out for that one. If not, in the market after that, it's kind of barren because maybe Jeremy goes back to Portland and some of your other targets are out. Then, at that point, yeah, I do think there's a good chance they could pivot to, let's just go to asset management mode. See if a team would give you something to get off of a big contract. Troy kind of hinted at it earlier this week with the new CBA, where it's just very punitive for teams to be in the tax multiple years in a row. And, I think we could see teams this summer who are in that middle begin to make moves to just lighten their financial load a bit, and pick more of a firm direction, right? If we're not contending, then we need to probably go toward a rebuild. So the Pistons can capitalize on that. And we've seen them eat money in the past doing that same sort of thing. I think that's a logical outcome for them.
I'm sorry, guys. You guys are right. I'm reading this. They would have the room exception non-taxpayer. I'm sorry. So 7.7 million, that makes a lot more sense. So yeah, I don't know why I was thinking the non-taxpayer. That's not Detroit. Mid-level room exception, 7.7 million on that one. So with the team drafting Thompson and Sasser, what does this mean for Hami, Kojo, and Magruder? I think eventually those guys, it was going to come down to roster spots anyway. Do you need Kojo if you keep Hayes and Burks and now you have Sasser? Maybe not. Do they see redundancy between Hami and Ausar? I could see that. I think it comes down to, again, what are you going to end up being able to sign in free agency? You have to do something with that 30 million. And so eventually you're looking at roster spots and just, are there enough for all of these guys? So I still don't hate those guys as end of the, roster. You have 15 spots. So, it doesn't have to be filled out with young guys or anything like that. But my guess is those guys may look for, if I'm Hami, I may be looking to go somewhere else for, more playing time, a bigger role than maybe what he sees for himself in Detroit. Kojo, it probably comes down to relationship stuff. Same thing with Magruder. Maybe he thinks he can go somewhere and actually get, in the rotation. He wasn't even in the rotation last year necessarily. So probably kind of depends where those guys are at in their careers and kind of what they're wanting.
Yeah, I still think probably Ronnie has the best chance of coming back just because of his relationship with Troy and, just what he's been to these guys in the locker room. With Sasser and Ausar, I believe they're at 12 roster spots. So, you bring somebody, one or two guys in free agency, and, you can see pretty quickly that, it's just, you can't bring all three of these guys back. I think we'll probably just see one of them come back, and they probably part ways with two. Yeah, and maybe they bring two back, depending on what happens in free agency, but just at this point, the math kind of weighs against them doing that.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Eventually it's a roster spot thing, right? And none of these guys are doing two-way, anything like that. So they have to be on the roster. And so it comes down to a roster crunch. And, if there's a trade where they, consolidated some guys, then maybe all of a sudden there's a higher chance they come back. I don't think any of us are foreseeing that. And so, 3 roster spots, 3 guys. They haven't signed anybody outside of the organization in free agency yet. And so it's hard to see all 3 of them come back. This is from Doug McMiniman, again, another big time supporter. Appreciate you. Is building a good defense personnel or having a good system? I mean, I think it's having a system that fits your personnel. I mean, that's, if you wanted to go full switch everything and you have Marcus Sasser, I don't think that that's going to be super successful because he just doesn't have that type of versatility. So I think it's really about having a system and then getting the right guys to fit the system or kind of adjusting your system. So with Marcus Sasser, you're playing drop coverage because you don't want him to switch on, a big guy. So I think it's making sure you mesh those 2 things. But man, I mean, I don't think if you have guys that don't believe in playing defense in that way or how important it is, I don't think it matters what your system is. So I do think it starts a little bit just with having a certain personnel.
It's certainly both. I think a system is only as good as its personnel. And just having good personnel alone isn't enough to form a good defense if the scheming isn't correct. So, I'll say it's 50-50 split. I think any good defensive coach needs the personnel to execute their scheme. I mean, we even talked about the Pistons in the past few years. You have a lot of young guys. So I think it's tough to form a good defense, with a team of players who are learning what they're doing in real time. But yeah, I mean, scheme, personnel, both those things are very important in that equation.
All right, Omari, I think all of us, including Wes, need to go get a nap in and rest up a little bit. Appreciate everybody that tuned in this morning and watched this with us. We wanted to get up. We wanted to get something out to you guys, and we appreciate all of you watching live. If you're listening on podcast, again, leave a rating, a review, Apple, Spotify. Those have really been increasing, and we appreciate it a lot. We will be back on Sunday with a live recording for our normal weekly episode. We'll do that Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then the podcast version will start dropping on Tuesdays again. So we'll be back kind of regularly scheduled stuff. Free agency coming up soon, Omar. I think the tampering period or whatever it's called is on the 30th. And so we'll see if anything drops with the Pistons. And then again, here in a couple of weeks, Omari, a really, really fun special episode where we'll record in person together out in Vegas. I think that one will be a lot of fun for everybody to do that one live. So thanks, Omari. I know you're on about 3-4 hours of sleep. I'm on not much more. Same with Wes. So we love doing this, and we definitely wanted to get something out here this morning.
Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. Appreciate the kind words, Charles. Great show as always. A lot to talk about in the next few weeks, of course, with draft, free agency, and then summer league, where me and Bryce will record live from Vegas. So again, big thanks to everybody, and I will close this out with a big thanks to our executive producer Anjanette Delgado, our sports editor Kirkland Crawford, and our audio producer Robin Chan. Also, big shout out to Wes Davenport, and we'll talk to you all Sunday.